Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadowman Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Eleanor Whitehorse, and I need to tell you what really happened in the Olympic Mountains in November 1972. The newspaper said it was an avalanche. The Park Service called it a tragic accident. But I was there. I saw what killed those people, and after 30 years of keeping quiet, I can't carry this secret anymore. I was 34 then, working as a ranger at Olympic National Park in Washington. My grandmother was Quinault, and she used to tell me stories about the forest when I was little. Stories about Siitko, the forest giants who punished people who didn't respect the land. I loved those stories, but I grew up to be a woman of science. I believed in facts, not fairy tales. I'd been a ranger for 16 years. I knew every trail, every ridge, every dangerous spot in that vast wilderness. People called me when someone went missing because I was good at finding them. 47 successful rescues in 10 years. I was proud of that record. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late November. A geological survey team had been missing for 4 days. 5 scientists from the university doing core sampling up on Hurricane Ridge. They should have been back on Saturday. It was now Wednesday, and a big storm was coming. My boss, Chief Ranger Tom Bradley, was worried. "Eleanor, you know that backcountry better than anyone. Can you get up there and find them?" I looked at the weather report. Snow was coming and the temperature was dropping fast. We had maybe 6 hours of daylight left. But 5 people were missing, and that meant 5 families waiting for news. "I'll take Jake and Lisa," I said. "We'll find them." Jake Morrison was my partner, a good man who'd been with the Park Service for 8 years. Lisa Martinez was newer, but she was tough and smart. If anyone could handle a rescue in rough weather, it was the 3 of us. The thing is, I had personal reasons for needing this rescue to go well. I was going through a messy divorce, and my ex-husband was fighting me for custody of my 8-year-old son, Tommy. He kept saying I was irresponsible, that my job was too dangerous for a mother. I needed my record to stay perfect. We flew up to Hurricane Ridge in a helicopter that afternoon. The pilot dropped us at the last known coordinates for the survey team. The mountains stretched out around us, covered in thick forest and sharp rocks. Beautiful but deadly if you didn't know what you were doing. "Weather's getting worse," the pilot shouted over the rotor noise. "I'll come back for you tomorrow morning if the storm passes." As the helicopter flew away, the silence hit us like a wall. No birds singing, no wind in the trees. Just dead quiet, which was strange for these mountains. "Something feels wrong," Lisa said, adjusting her pack. I felt it too, but I didn't want to admit it. The air was too still, too heavy. And where were all the animals? Usually you'd see deer, hear squirrels, maybe spot an eagle. But there was nothing. We started hiking toward the survey team's planned campsite. The trail was muddy from recent rain, and I could see boot prints from the scientists. But there were other prints too. Bigger ones. Much bigger. "Bear?" Jake asked, kneeling next to one of the prints. I studied it carefully. It looked like a footprint, but it was enormous. 14 inches long, with what looked like toe marks. But the shape was wrong for a bear. Too narrow, too human-like. "Maybe," I said, but I didn't believe it. We kept hiking as the sun got lower. The trees seemed to press closer together. The shadows got darker. And that smell started. A thick, musky odor that made my stomach turn. "You smell that?" Lisa asked, covering her nose. "Dead animal, probably," Jake said. "Maybe that's what happened to the survey team. They ran into a sick bear." But I remembered my grandmother's stories about Siitko, about the smell that came before they appeared. I shook my head. I was a scientist. I didn't believe in old stories. We found the survey team's camp just as the sun was setting, and that's when I knew something was very, very wrong. The campsite was a disaster. Tents were knocked over, but not torn. Equipment was scattered everywhere, but nothing was stolen. Expensive scientific instruments lay in the mud, ignored. The team's truck was still there, keys in the ignition. If it was bandits, they would have taken the equipment, Lisa said, picking up a $3,000 seismograph. I studied the scene like I'd been trained. No signs of a struggle, no blood, no bodies. It was like the 5 scientists had just vanished into thin air. "Look at this," Jake called from behind a fallen log. I walked over and saw what he was pointing at. Handprints in the mud. But these weren't human hands. They were huge, with long fingers that ended in what looked like claws. And they were everywhere, pressed deep into the soft ground. "What kind of animal makes prints like that?" Lisa asked. I didn't answer because I didn't know. In 20 years of working in these mountains, I'd never seen anything like them. We set up our own camp as darkness fell. The forest around us was still unnaturally quiet. No owls hooting, no insects chirping. Even the wind had stopped. "I don't like this," Lisa said, stirring our camp stove dinner. "It's too quiet." Jake was checking his compass and frowning. "This thing's going crazy. It keeps spinning." I looked at my own compass. Same problem. The needle wouldn't hold steady on magnetic north. It just spun around and around. "Solar flare, maybe," I said. But I didn't sound convinced even to myself. That night I couldn't sleep. Every few minutes I'd hear something moving in the forest, branches breaking, footsteps that sounded too heavy to be human. But when I'd sit up and listen carefully, there was nothing. Around midnight, the seismic equipment we'd brought started going crazy. The needles jumped like we were having an earthquake, but the ground felt solid under my sleeping bag. "Eleanor," Jake whispered. "You hearing this?" I was. A deep, low sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Too low for human ears to really hear, but you could feel it in your bones. It made me feel sick and scared, like some animal part of my brain was screaming warnings. Then we heard the scream. It came from somewhere up the mountain, long, loud, and angry. Not human, but not quite animal either. Something in between. Something that shouldn't exist. "What was that?" Lisa asked, her voice shaking. "Elk," Jake said quickly. "Bull elk can make some weird sounds." But I knew elk sounds. This wasn't elk. This was something else. Something bigger. Something that didn't belong in any nature book. The scream came again, closer this time, and then another one from a different direction, and another, like they were surrounding us. We huddled together in our small tent, listening to the sounds moving through the forest. Heavy footsteps, branches breaking, and that awful smell getting stronger. "We need to find those scientists at first light," I said. "Something's hunting in these mountains." But deep down, I was starting to suspect the scientists were already dead, and we might be next. Morning came gray and cold. The storm clouds were getting thicker and snow was starting to fall. We had to find the survey team fast before the weather got worse. We followed their trail up the mountain. The boot prints were easy to track in the soft ground, but mixed in with them were those other prints, the big ones, and they were following the same path. "Look at this," Lisa said, pointing to a tree. About 8 feet up the trunk, there were claw marks, deep gouges in the bark like something had used the tree as a scratching post. But what animal was tall enough to, make marks that high? We kept climbing. The snow was falling harder now and the wind was picking up. The trail got steeper and more dangerous. This was getting into country where only experienced hikers should go. That's when we found Dr. Sarah Chen's jacket. It was hanging from a branch, torn and bloody, but there was no body, no blood trail, just the jacket, flapping in the wind like a flag. "Where is she?" Lisa asked, looking around frantically. I examined the jacket. The tears looked like claw marks, but they were too big for any animal I knew. And there was something else, a smell on the fabric. That same musky odor we'd been smelling since yesterday. "We need to keep looking," I said. "She might still be alive." But as we climbed higher, I found something that made my blood run cold. Footprints in the snow. Human footprints, but they just stopped, right in the middle of the trail, like whoever was making them had just disappeared. That's when Jake grabbed my arm and pointed up at the trees. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "look." 25 feet up in the fork of a big pine tree, there was a body. A man in a red jacket, wedged between the branches like a doll. His arms and legs were bent at impossible angles. "How did he get up there?" Lisa whispered. I stared at the body, and my scientific mind tried to find an explanation. A fall? An avalanche? But we were on flat ground. There was no way someone could fall and end up that high in a tree, unless something had put him there. Something strong enough to throw a grown man 25 feet into the air. We managed to get Dr. Mark Rivera's body down from the tree. It took ropes and careful climbing, but we had to do it. We needed to know what had killed him. The answer made my hands shake. His skull was crushed, but not by any animal I knew. The damage was too precise, too purposeful, and there were bruises on his body that looked like fingerprints. Huge fingerprints. "What could do this?" Lisa asked, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't answer because I was starting to remember things. Stories my jaws. Grandmother told me when I was little about Sietko, the forest giants, about what happened to people who disturbed sacred places. "We need to get out of here," I said. "Call for the helicopter." But our radio was dead, just static, and the snow was falling harder now, making flying impossible anyway. "We're trapped," Jake said, stating the obvious. That's when we heard the footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming from several directions, like we were being surrounded. "Get behind that log," I whispered. "Stay quiet." We crouched behind a fallen tree trunk and waited. The footsteps got closer and closer, and that smell, that awful, musky smell, got so strong I had to breathe through my mouth. Then I saw it. Just a glimpse between the trees. A shape moving through the forest. Tall, covered in dark fur. Walking upright like a man, but bigger. Much bigger. "Did you see that?" Lisa asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The shape disappeared, but the footsteps kept circling us. We were being watched, studied, like prey. "This is impossible," Jake whispered. "This can't be real." But it was real, and it was hunting us. We stayed hidden for what felt like hours. The footsteps would come close, then move away. Sometimes we'd hear breathing, heavy, deep breathing that didn't sound human. When the sounds finally stopped, we waited another hour before moving. We had to find the other scientists. We had to understand what was happening. The trail led higher up the mountain, toward an area my grandmother had told me about. Sacred burial grounds. Places where the Kino people had laid their ancestors to rest. Places where white people weren't supposed to go. The survey team was doing core sampling, I said, putting the pieces together. They were drilling into the mountain. "So," Jake said, "so they might have disturbed something. Something that's been sleeping for a long too. We found the second body near the drilling site. Dr. Amanda Price, the team leader. She was crushed against a tree trunk, her body broken like a toy, but her equipment was still running, still taking samples from deep in the earth. They were drilling into a burial ground, I said, looking at the core samples. Ancient bones, artifacts. They disturbed the ancestors. "Eleanor, you're talking crazy," Jake said. "You sound like those old stories." He stopped talking because we could hear something moving in the trees above us. Something big, jumping from branch to branch, following us. "We need to run," I said. But as we started to move, rocks began falling from the sky. Big rocks. Boulders weighing hundreds of pounds, thrown with impossible accuracy. One smashed into the ground right where we'd been standing. "What's throwing those?" Lisa screamed. I looked up and saw shapes in the trees. Multiple shapes, dark and massive, moving through the branches like they weighed nothing. "There's more than one," I said. We ran. Through the trees, down the mountain, slipping and sliding in the snow. Behind us, we could hear them following, branches breaking, the ground shaking with their footsteps. Jake was slowing down. He was older, not as fast as Lisa and me, and they were getting closer. "Keep going," I shouted. "Don't stop." But Jake stumbled, fell. and by the time we turned around to help him, he was gone. Not dead. Gone. Vanished. Like something had snatched him right off the ground. "Jake!" Lisa screamed. I grabbed her arm. "We have to keep moving. If we stop, we're dead." But as we ran, I could hear Jake's voice in the distance. He was speaking, but not in English. He was speaking in Quinault, my grandmother's language, words he couldn't possibly know. The words were a warning, a message, but Jake didn't speak Quinault. He'd never learned it. Something was using his voice, something that knew the old language, something that remembered when my people lived in these mountains. We kept running as the snow fell harder. The forest was getting darker, and somewhere behind us, Jake's voice kept speaking in a language he'd never learned, saying things that made my blood run cold. The ancestors were angry. The sacred places had been violated, and they wanted revenge. But the worst part was still coming. We found shelter in a small cave as the storm got worse. Lisa was shaking, not from cold, but from fear. I was trying to stay calm, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. "What's happening to us?" she asked. I knew I had to tell her the truth. My grandmother's people have stories about creatures in these mountains, forest giants. They protect sacred places from people who don't respect them. "You're talking about Bigfoot," Lisa said. "That's just a myth." "Is it?" I asked. "We've seen the footprints. We've heard them. They killed those scientists for drilling into burial grounds." Lisa stared at me. "You really believe that?" Before I could answer, we heard Jake's voice again. But this time, he was close, right outside the cave. "Eleanor," he called. "Come out, it's safe now." But his voice was wrong, too deep, too calm, and he was still speaking some words in Quinault. "That's not Jake," I whispered. "Eleanor," the voice called again. "They want to talk to you. They know who you are." I looked at Lisa. "Stay here. Don't come out no matter what you hear." "Don't go out there," she begged. But I had to. If there was any chance of getting out of this alive, I had to face whatever was waiting for me. I stepped out of the cave into the falling snow. The forest was dark, but I could see shapes moving between the trees, tall shapes, watching me. "Jake?" I called. He stepped out from behind a tree. But it wasn't Jake. Not really. His eyes were different, empty, like something else was looking through them. "They remember your grandmother," he said in that wrong voice. "She showed respect. She brought offerings. But these men," he gestured toward the drilling site, "they took without asking. They disturbed the sleeping ones." "What are you?" I asked. "We are the guardians, the protectors. We have been here since before your people came, since before the white men came. We will be here after they are gone." More shapes stepped out of the trees. I counted at least 5 of them. Huge, covered in dark fur, walking upright like men, but bigger than any man. Their eyes glowed in the darkness. The largest one stepped forward. It was at least 10 feet tall with arms like tree trunks. When it spoke, the voice came from Jake's mouth, but the words were its own. "The Earth Takers violated sacred ground. They must pay the price." "They're already dead," I said. "Isn't that enough?" "No. The message must be clear. No more drilling, no more taking. The mountain is sacred." I understood then. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about protecting the land. About sending a message that some places were off limits. "I'm Quinault," I said. "My grandmother taught me the old ways. I respect the sacred places." The giant creature tilted its head. "You wear the white man's uniform. You serve their system." "I protect the forest," I said. "I keep people safe." "From us?" "From everything. From getting lost. From making mistakes. From going places they shouldn't go." The creature was quiet for a long moment. Then it stepped closer. I could smell its breath, feel the heat from its body. It was real. Solid. Not a spirit or a ghost, but a living thing. "You will tell them," it said. You will tell them the mountains are protected, that some places are forbidden, that the guardians are watching. I'll tell them, I said. But then Lisa came running out of the cave. Eleanor, get away from it! She was carrying a flare gun, probably planning to scare the creature away. But it didn't work like that. The giant being roared, a sound that shook the trees and made the ground tremble. Jake, or whatever was controlling him, lunged at Lisa. I tried to stop him, but he was too strong. His hands wrapped a parade round her throat, and I could hear bones breaking. No! I screamed. The giant creature turned toward me. Its eyes were full of ancient anger. She attacked us. She showed no respect. Lisa fell to the ground, her neck bent at an impossible angle. Dead. You killed her, I said. She chose violence. We defend ourselves. I knew then that I was going to die, that I'd never see my son again, that my ex-husband would win custody because I'd be dead in these mountains. But the creature surprised me. It stepped back. You are Kino, it said. Your blood remembers the old agreements. You may go. What about Jake? The creature that looked like Jake smiled, but it wasn't Jake's smile. He will stay. He will remember what he learned here. He will serve as a warning to others. I looked at Jake's empty eyes and knew he was gone. Not dead, but not alive either. Something else now. Go, the giant creature said, before we change our minds. I ran, through the snow, down the mountain, leaving Lisa's body and Jake's hollow shell behind. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I ran until I couldn't run anymore. That's when I found Dr. Sarah Chen. She was alive, barely, hiding in a hollow log, half frozen and terrified. She'd been hiding for 3 days, listening to her team die one by one. What were those things? She whispered. Guardians, I said. Protectors of the sacred places. They're not real. They can't be real. But they were real. And they were still out there, watching, waiting. The helicopter found us the next morning. Dr. Chen was suffering from hypothermia and shock. She could barely speak, and when she did, she just kept saying, "The trees." The trees were full of eyes. I told the rescue team about the avalanche, about how the survey team had been caught in a rock slide, about how Jake and Lisa had died trying to save them. It was a lie, but it won't be, Mom. It was a lie that people could accept. Dr. Chen never spoke about what really happened. The trauma broke something in her mind, and she spent the next 6 months in a psychiatric hospital. When she got out, she'd changed careers. She became a librarian. She never went into the wilderness again. The geological survey was canceled permanently. The drilling site was declared off-limits due to unstable conditions. The university never sent another team to Hurricane Ridge. I quit the Park Service 3 months later. I couldn't keep working in those mountains knowing what was out there, knowing that Jake was still somewhere in the forest, changed into something else. I became a cultural liaison between the Park Service and the Kinole tribe. I helped establish new protected areas around the sacred sites. I made sure that certain places were marked as forbidden to visitors. My ex-husband won custody of Tommy. The court decided that my trauma from the avalanche made me an unfit mother. He was probably right. I had nightmares every night. I couldn't sleep without checking the locks on my doors. I jumped at every sound in the darkness. But I also learned things. I reconnected with my grandmother's traditions. I learned the old prayers, the old songs. I learned how to leave offerings at sacred places, how to show respect to the guardians, because they're still there, in the deep forests, far from the hiking trails, watching, protecting, making sure that some places stay sacred. I'm 70 now. Tommy has grown up with kids of his own. Sometimes he asks about that winter in 1972, about why I changed so much, about why I never went back to being a ranger. I tell him about the importance of respecting the land, about how some places are too sacred to disturb, about how the mountains have their own guardians older than any human law. He thinks I'm talking about metaphors, about the need for environmental protection. He doesn't understand that I'm talking about real creatures with real power. But maybe that's better. Maybe the world isn't ready to know the truth about it's what lives in the deep places. Maybe it's better to let people think the wilderness is empty, waiting to be explored and exploited. Because the guardians are patient. They've been waiting for thousands of years. They can wait a little longer. But they're still watching, still protecting, still punishing those who take without asking. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is just right, I can hear them moving through the forests, keeping their ancient promises, protecting the sacred places. The mountains remember, the guardians remember, and they never forget. My name is Vincent Copper, and I need to tell you what really happened out on Stockton Island in February 1981. I've been a ranger at Apostle Islands National Lakeshore for 20 years now, and I've seen plenty of things that would make most people think twice about spending time in the wilderness. But nothing prepared me for what I found in those ice caves. People always ask me why I stay out here on Lake Superior when the winters get so brutal. The truth is, this place is in my blood. My grandmother was Ojibwe, and she used to tell me stories about these islands when I was small. Stories about things that came out when the lake froze solid and the world turned white as bone. I used to think they were just fairy tales, meant to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. I should have listened better. The winter of 1981 was the coldest anyone could remember. By February, the temperature had dropped to 40 below with the wind chill. Lake Superior was frozen solid for the first time in decades, thick enough to walk on, thick enough to drive a snowmobile across. The ice caves on Stockton Island were open to visitors, something that only happened in the worst winters. That's when the ice fishing tournament started. 8 men from Duluth decided they wanted to try their luck on the frozen lake. They set up their shelters right near the caves, thinking they'd found the perfect spot. The leader was a guy named Carl Peterson. He'd won tournaments before, knew what he was doing. Or so we thought. I was working my regular shift when the call came in. My partner Tom Wyndham and I were supposed to check on the fishing group. They were 3 days overdue for their check-in. Tom was a good ranger, been working with me for 5 years. He knew the ice, knew the dangers. If something had happened to those fishermen, we'd find them. My mother was staying with me that winter. Essie, he had dementia, and I was the only family she had left. Before Tom and I headed out, I made sure she had enough food and that the neighbors would check on her. She grabbed my hand as I was leaving. "Vincent," she said, her eyes suddenly clear. "Don't go to the ice caves. Something's wrong out there." I kissed her forehead and promised I'd be careful. I thought it was just the dementia talking. I wish I'd listened. The snowmobiles started up fine that morning, but as we got closer to Stockton Island, something felt off. The ice formations looked strange, twisted into shapes that didn't make sense. Fish were frozen solid in the ice, stuck in mid-swim like they'd been flash frozen while trying to escape something. Tom noticed it too. "You ever see anything like that before?" he asked, pointing to a section of ice where the fish were all swimming in the same direction, away from the island. "No," I said. "Never." We found the fishing shelters about noon. From a distance, everything looked normal. The tents were still up, the equipment was still running. But as we got closer, we could see that something was very wrong. The first shelter was empty, but there were signs of a struggle. Fishing rods were snapped in half, tackle boxes overturned. There was blood on the ice, dark red against the white. But what really bothered me were the bite marks on the frozen fish they'd caught. The teeth marks were too big, too sharp to be human. Tom and I looked at each other. In 20 years of rescue work, I'd never seen anything like it. "Must be a bear," Tom said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Bears are hibernating," I replied. "And when's the last time you saw a bear bite through ice like that?" We tried to start the snowmobiles to head back and call for backup, but the engines wouldn't turn over. The thermometers on our equipment were reading impossible temperatures. Some said it was 100 below. Others said it was boiling hot. Nothing was working right. That's when we heard the first scream. The sound came from somewhere near the ice caves, echoing across the frozen lake like nothing I'd ever heard before. It wasn't quite human, but it wasn't animal either. It was something in between, something that made my bones ache and my stomach turn. "We need to find those fishermen," Tom said, but his voice was shaking. I nodded, though every instinct I had was telling me to run. We followed the blood trail toward the caves, our boots crunching on the ice. The sound of our breathing was too loud in the silence. The trail led us to a second shelter, this one partially collapsed. Inside, we found Carl Peterson. He was frozen solid, sitting upright like he'd been turned to ice in the middle of doing something. But parts of him were missing. Big chunks of flesh had been torn away from his arms and legs, eaten right down to the bone. "Jesus," Tom whispered. "What could do this?" I examined the body more closely. The bite marks were huge, much bigger than any animal I knew. And they were clean, like whatever had done this had very sharp teeth. "We need to get out of here," I said. "This isn't a rescue anymore. This is a crime scene." But as I spoke, I realized I was feeling something strange. Looking at Carl's body, at the torn flesh and exposed muscle, I felt hungry. Not normal hungry, but starving, like I hadn't eaten in days. The thought disgusted me, but I couldn't shake it. Tom was staring at the body too, and I could see something change in his eyes. He licked his lips. "Tom," I said, "we need to go. Now." He nodded, but he didn't move. He kept staring at Carl's frozen remains. That's when we heard the second scream, much closer this time. It came from inside the caves, a sound that seemed to go on forever. The ice under our feet vibrated with it, and I felt something cold wrap around my heart that had nothing to do with the weather. "There might be survivors," Tom said, but his voice was different now, deeper, hungrier. Against my better judgment, I followed him toward the caves. The opening was about 10 feet wide, leading into darkness. Our flashlights barely penetrated the gloom. The walls were covered in ice, but as we went deeper, I could see things frozen in the ice. Things that looked like pieces of clothing, pieces of equipment, pieces of people. "Vincent," Tom said, his voice echoing strangely. "Look at this." He was shining his light on something that made my blood freeze. It was a makeshift camp, set up deep in the cave. There was a small fire still burning, and hanging above it was a metal pot. The smell coming from it was awful and wonderful at the same time. It smelled like cooking meat, rich and fatty and warm. Around the fire were bones, human bones, picked clean and stacked neatly. Some of them had been cracked open, the marrow sucked out. "They were eating each other," Tom said, and there was something like excitement in his voice. "They got trapped in here and they started eating each other." I wanted to throw up, but that hungry feeling was getting stronger. The smell from the pot was making my mouth water, and I hated myself for it. "We need to leave," I said again. But even as I spoke, I was moving closer to the fire. Tom was already there, looking into the pot. "There's still some left," he said. "Just a little." I grabbed his arm. "What's wrong with you?" He turned to look at me, and his eyes were different. They were bigger, hungrier. His teeth looked sharper. "I'm just so hungry, Vincent," he said. "Aren't you hungry too?" I was. God help me, I was starving. But something in my grandmother's stories was coming back to me. Something about people who ate human flesh in times of desperation. Something about what they became. "Wendigo," I whispered. Tom smiled, and I could see that his teeth were definitely sharper now. "What did you say?" Before I could answer, we heard another scream from deeper in the caves. This one was different, more animal than human, and it was getting closer. "We need to run," I said, but Tom was already changing. His fingernails were growing longer, darker. His face was getting thinner, more angular. He was becoming something else. "Don't run, Vincent," he said, his voice now a low growl. "Stay and eat with me." I backed away from him, toward the mouth of the cave. But as I did, I heard something that made my heart stop. More screams coming from all around us. Not just from the caves, but from the ice outside, from everywhere. We weren't alone. I ran from the cave as fast as I could, but the screaming was getting louder. It was coming from every direction now, echoing across the frozen lake like a pack of wolves howling at the moon. But these weren't wolves. These were something much worse. Behind me, I could hear Tom following. But he wasn't running like a man anymore. He was moving differently, faster, like he was hunting. I could hear his breath getting deeper, more animal-like. The wind picked up suddenly, creating a blizzard out of nowhere. The temperature dropped so fast that my breath froze in my throat. I could barely see 3 feet in front of me, and the screaming was getting closer. I stumbled through the snow, trying to get back to where we'd left the snowmobiles. But everything looked different now. The ice formations had changed, twisted into new shapes that looked almost like people. Tall, thin people with long arms and sharp teeth. My radio crackled to life, but instead of normal static, it was full of more screaming. Human voices mixed with something else, something that sounded like it came from the bottom of a deep well. "Vincent!" Tom's voice called from somewhere in the blizzard. "Where are you going? Come back." But it didn't sound like Tom anymore. It sounded like something pretending to be Tom, something that had learned to use his voice. I kept running, but the hungry feeling was getting stronger. My stomach felt like it was eating itself from the inside. I started thinking about the pot in the cave, about the smell of cooking meat. I thought about Carl's frozen body, about how easy it would be to just take a small piece, just enough to stop the hunger. The thoughts disgusted me, but I couldn't make them stop. I found the snowmobiles, but they were different now. They looked like they'd been there for years, rusted and broken. The fuel tanks were empty, the engines frozen solid. We were trapped. That's when I saw the first one. It was standing about 50 yards away, barely visible in the blizzard. It was tall, maybe 13 feet, and so thin it looked like a skeleton wrapped in gray skin. Its arms were too long, hanging down almost to its knees. Its face was human, but wrong. The eyes were too big, the mouth too wide, and its teeth were like needles, yellow and sharp. It was looking right at me. I tried to back away, but my legs wouldn't move. The thing opened its mouth and let out that terrible scream again, and I felt something break inside my head. The hunger got so strong that I doubled over, holding my stomach. When I looked up again, there were more of them. 5, maybe 6, all standing in a circle around me. They all looked like they had once been human, but they were wrong now. Twisted. Hungry. One of them stepped forward, and I recognized the face. It was Carl Peterson, but changed. His skin was gray and stretched tight over his bones. His eyes were black holes. His mouth was full of those needle teeth. "Vincent," he said, his voice like wind through dead trees. "You look so hungry. Why don't you eat?" Another one moved closer. This one looked like it might have been one of the other fishermen, but it was hard to tell. They all looked the same now, like they were becoming one thing. "Join us," it said. "It's so much better than being hungry." I felt myself taking a step toward them. The hunger was so strong now that I couldn't think straight. All I could think about was eating, about stopping the pain in my stomach. That's when I heard Tom's voice again, but this time it was coming from right behind me. "Vincent," he said, and I could feel his breath on my neck. "I'm so sorry." I turned around just as he bit into my shoulder. His teeth, now long and sharp, went through my winter coat like it was paper. I screamed and tried to pull away, but he was too strong. The pain was incredible, but worse than the pain was the feeling that came after. The bite was cold, colder than the winter air, and I could feel something spreading through my body from the wound, something that made the hunger even stronger. I managed to break free and stumbled away from him, blood running down my arm. But I could feel the change starting. My teeth were getting sharper, my fingernails were growing, and the hunger was becoming everything. The circle of creatures was getting closer now, and I could see more of them emerging from the caves. They were all looking at me with those black, hungry eyes. "One of us," they chanted together. "One of us." I looked at Tom, at what he'd become, and I knew that was my future. In a few minutes, maybe less, I would be just like them, hungry, always hungry, and willing to do anything to feed. But then I remembered something my grandmother had told me, something about the Wendigo that I'd forgotten until now. She'd said that they were born from desperation, from people who chose to eat human flesh rather than die. But she'd also said something else. She'd said there was a way to fight them. The creatures were closing in, and I could feel the infection spreading through my body. My teeth were definitely sharper now, and my fingernails had grown into claws. But my grandmother's words kept echoing in my mind. The Wendigo feeds on desperation, she'd said, but it cannot touch those who remember what it means to be human. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small pouch of tobacco she'd given me years ago. She'd told me to always carry it, to use it when I needed to remember who I was. Sacred tobacco, I whispered, and even saying the words made me feel a little more like myself. The creatures heard me and hissed, backing away slightly. Tom, his face now completely changed, snarled at me. "That won't help you," he said. "You're already changing. You can feel it, can't you? The hunger?" He was right. I was starving, and looking at him, at all of them, I could see meat, food. But I forced myself to remember what they used to be. People. Human beings who had families, who had loved ones. "You were my friend," I said to Tom. "You had a wife, kids. You loved them." For just a moment, something flickered in his black eyes. Something human. I remember," he said, his voice becoming more normal. "Sarah. My wife's name was Sarah." But then the hunger took over again, and he lunged at me. I dodged and ran toward the caves, pulling out my ice axe. I knew I couldn't outrun them, but maybe I could find something in the caves that would help me fight them. They followed me, all of them, their screams echoing off the ice walls. But as I ran deeper into the caves, I started to understand something. They weren't just hunting me. They were trying to convert me, to make me one of them. The original Wendigo, the first one, was still in the caves. I could feel it calling to me, calling to the infection in my blood. It wanted me to come to it, to give up my humanity and join its pack. I found it in the deepest part of the cave, sitting by the fire where Tom and I had found the pot. It was huge, bigger than the others, and old. So old that its skin had turned white as bone. Its eyes were like holes in the world, and when it spoke, its voice was like the wind through a graveyard. "Welcome, Vincent," it said. "I've been waiting for you." "You're the first one," I said, "the one who started this." It smiled, showing teeth, like broken glass. "I was like you once, a man trying to survive in the wilderness, but I made a choice. When the hunger became too much, I chose to live instead of die. You chose to become a monster. I chose to become something greater than human, something that never has to feel hungry again." The infection was spreading faster now. I could feel my humanity slipping away piece by piece. Soon, I would be just like them, always hungry, always hunting. But I still had the tobacco, and I still had my grandmother's words. I started to pray, using the Ojibwe words she'd taught me when I was small. Words about the spirits of the forest, about the balance between life and death, words about what it meant to be human. The Wendigo screamed and backed away. "Stop!" But I kept praying, and I pulled out the tobacco, throwing it on the fire. The flames turned blue, then white, and suddenly the cave was filled with light. The Wendigo and its pack were writhing in the light, their forms becoming less solid. But the infection was still spreading through me, and I could feel my time running out. Tom appeared beside me, but for a moment, he looked like himself again. "Vincent," he said, his voice human, "you have to kill me, while I'm still me enough to ask." I looked at him, at my friend, and I knew he was right. The Wendigo curse was strong, but it couldn't completely destroy the human soul. Not immediately. "I'm sorry," I said. "Don't be," he replied. "Just remember me as I was." I raised the ice axe and brought it down. Tom smiled just before the blade hit him, and for that moment he was completely human again. The Wendigo screamed as Tom died, and I felt something break in the connection between us. The infection was still there, but it was weaker now. I grabbed more tobacco from my pouch and threw it on the fire. The flames grew brighter, and I started to pray again, louder this time. I prayed for Tom, for the fishermen, for everyone who had been lost to the hunger. The Wendigo was dissolving in the light, its ancient form finally breaking apart, but as it died, it spoke one last time. "You cannot kill the hunger," it said. "It will always return. When the winter is cold enough, when people are desperate enough, I will come back." And then it was gone, leaving only smoke and the smell of burned tobacco. But I could still feel the infection in my blood. I was changed, forever marked by what I'd experienced. I would always carry a part of that hunger with me. I made it back to the mainland the next day, walking across the frozen lake in the morning sun. The blizzard had stopped, and the temperature was rising. The ice caves would be closed again soon, sealed away until the next terrible winter. The official report said that the fishermen had died of hypothermia. Tom was listed as a victim of the same cold that had killed the others. I was the only survivor, and I told the investigators that I'd gotten separated from Tom during the blizzard, that I'd searched for him but couldn't find him. They believed me. People always want to believe the simple explanation. But I knew the truth, and I knew it wasn't over. I had to retire from the Park Service 6 months later. I couldn't handle being out in the wilderness anymore, especially not in winter. Every time I saw ice, I remembered that cave. Every time I got hungry, I remembered the smell of cooking meat and the way it had made my mouth water. I started working with the tribal elders instead, learning more about the old stories. I found out that the Wendigo wasn't unique to our area. There were stories about it all around the Great Lakes, anywhere that winter could trap people and drive them to desperation. My mother died the following winter. The dementia took her quickly after I got back, like she'd been holding on just long enough to see me safe. Sometimes I wonder if she knew what was coming, if her warning had been more than just confused rambling. I moved to a small house in town, but I never stopped watching the weather reports. Every year when the temperatures started to drop and the lake began to freeze, I felt that old hunger stirring. And I knew that somewhere out there, in the deep woods and the frozen caves, the Wendigo was waiting. It's been 40 years now since that winter on Stockton Island. 40 years of watching and waiting. I've warned people when I could, talked to reporters about the dangers of ice fishing on the outer islands. Most of them think I'm just a crazy old man, traumatized by what I saw out there. But every few years, when the winter is especially cold, people go missing on the lake. Hunters, fishermen, hikers who thought they could handle the wilderness. They find the bodies eventually, usually in the spring when the ice melts. The official cause of death is always the same: hypothermia, animal attack, accidental drowning. But I know better. I know that some hungers can never be satisfied. Some curses can never be broken. And some monsters are just waiting for the right moment to wake up. The Wendigo is still out there, in the ice caves and the deep woods. It's waiting for the next group of people to get lost, to get desperate, to make the same choice that turned those fishermen into monsters. And part of it is still in me. Every winter when the temperature drops and the wind howls across the frozen lake, I feel it stirring. I feel that terrible hunger, that need to feed. I fight it every day, using the prayers my grandmother taught me, using the tobacco and the old ways. But I'm getting older, and it's getting harder to fight. Sometimes I wonder what will happen when I'm gone. Who will watch for the signs? Who will warn people when the Wendigo wakes up again? I'm telling you this story because someone needs to know. Someone needs to remember. The Wendigo is real, and it's still out there. When the winter is cold enough, when people are desperate enough, it will come back. And when it does, remember what I've told you. Remember that the hunger is the most dangerous predator in the wilderness. Remember that some prices are too high to pay, even for survival. Remember that being human is worth more than being alive. The ice caves are open again this winter. The temperature has been below zero for 3 weeks straight. And yesterday, I heard on the news that a group of ice fishermen from Chicago is planning a tournament on Stockton Island. I tried to warn them, but they wouldn't listen. They never do. So I'm writing this down, hoping that someday someone will read it and understand. The Wendigo isn't just a story. It's not just a legend. It's real. And it's hungry. Always hungry. My name is Daniel Strongeagle, and I need to tell you what really happened in the Badlands that October. The official report says it was a wolf attack. That's a lie. I've been a park ranger for 14 years at Badlands National Park in South Dakota. I know these lands like the back of my hand. Every trail, every rock formation, every animal that calls this place home, or at least I thought I did. October 1987 was supposed to be my fresh start. I'd just gotten back from 3 months of rehab, trying to get my life together after the bottle nearly destroyed everything I'd worked for. My supervisor, Jim Martinez, gave me one last chance. "Prove you can handle the job again, Daniel," he said. "Show me the ranger I hired 14 years ago." The Badlands in October are something special. The grasslands turn gold, the air gets crisp, and you can see for miles across the prairie. But that month felt different. Wrong, somehow. The coyotes were acting strange, moving in big packs toward the park boundaries like they were running from something. Ranchers outside the park were calling about cattle getting killed in ways that didn't make sense. Not eaten, just torn apart and left. I tried to ignore the feeling in my gut. Old superstitions, I told myself. My grandmother used to tell stories about things that hunted in these lands long before white settlers came. Stories about the Shunka Warakin, the dogmen who ran in packs and judged those who broke sacred laws. But I'd left those old ways behind when I joined the modern world. My partner was Maria Santos, a 5-year veteran who'd transferred from Yellowstone. She was tough, smart, and didn't put up with any nonsense. We worked the remote areas together, and she was helping me get back into the rhythm of the job. "You seem jumpy lately," she said one morning as we loaded our ATV for patrol. "Everything okay?" "Just getting. I'm used to being back," I told her. But that wasn't the whole truth. I'd been having dreams. Not drinking dreams, but something else. Dreams of running through darkness, of howling that made my bones ache, of eyes that glowed like amber in the night. Our patrol area was the Sage Creek Wilderness, the most remote part of the park. 25 miles from the visitor center, it was where serious hikers and hunters went to get away from civilization. The full moon was coming, and that always made the wildlife more active. The call came in on October 15th. A hunting party from Minneapolis had been camping in the wilderness area for 3 days. They were supposed to check in every evening by radio, but they'd gone silent. Their wives were worried. "Probably just having too much fun," Maria said as we drove out to their last known location. "You know how these city guys get when they're playing Mountain Man." But I had a bad feeling crawling up my spine. The morning air smelled wrong, too sharp, too wild. Even the birds seemed quieter than usual. We found their camp around noon, or what was left of it. The scene hit me like a punch to the gut. 6 tents had been shredded, not cut but torn apart by something with claws. Sleeping bags were scattered everywhere, some of them soaked with dark stains. Camping gear was thrown around like a tornado had hit, but this wasn't weather damage. "Jesus," Maria whispered, drawing her sidearm. "What could do this?" I knelt down to examine the damage. The tears in the fabric were too big for normal claws, and they were made from the inside out. Whatever had done this had been inside the tents with the campers. "Daniel, look at this," Maria called from the other side of the camp. Their rifles were gone, all 6 of them. But the expensive scopes and equipment were still there, scattered in the dirt. What kind of animal would take guns but Leah, with valuable gear? Then I saw the tracks. They were canine, all right, but wrong. Too big, for one thing. Each paw print was the size of my hand. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was that they sometimes showed claws, and sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they looked like a 4-legged animal, and sometimes they looked like something walking on 2 legs. "We need to call this in," Maria said. "Get a search and rescue team out here." I was about to agree when I heard something that made my blood freeze. A howl, long and mournful, coming from the direction of the sacred hill. My grandmother's hill, where she used to take me as a boy to leave offerings and pray. But this wasn't a normal wolf howl. This was something else. Something that seemed to echo inside my head as much as in the air around us. Maria heard it too. Her face went pale. That doesn't sound like any wolf I've ever heard. The howl came again, closer this time. And then it was answered. And answered again. A whole pack, calling to each other in voices that seemed almost human. I grabbed Maria's arm. We need to get out of here, now. But when we got back to our ATV, we found the tires slashed. Not by claws this time, but by something sharp and precise. And the radio antenna had been bent into a pattern that made my skin crawl, a spiral design that looked like something from the old stories. We were alone in the wilderness with whatever had destroyed the hunting camp. And from the way the howling was getting closer, I had a feeling it knew exactly where we were. The howling stopped, and that was somehow worse than the sound itself. The silence pressed down on us like a heavy blanket. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. How far are we from the main road? Maria asked, checking her gear. 8 miles, I said, looking at the ruined ATV. Through rough country. I tried the radio one more time, but all we got was static, mixed with something that sounded like growling. Deep, rumbling sounds that definitely weren't coming from any radio tower. We follow. The creek bed, I decided. Stay in the open, away from the rocks where something could hide. As we started walking, I kept my eyes on the ground. The strange tracks were everywhere now, crisscrossing our path like the hunters had been surrounded. Some of the prints showed claw marks so deep they'd gouged the hard earth. Daniel, Maria's voice was tight. I found something. She was standing next to a cluster of pine trees, pointing at something hanging from a low branch. It was a piece of flannel shirt, torn and bloody, but it was hanging too high for a normal animal to have put it there. Jim Morrison, I read from the name tape still attached to the fabric. He was the group leader. The metallic smell of blood was thick in the air. I followed it deeper into the trees, my hand on my weapon. What I found there made my stomach turn. Jim Morrison was propped against a tree trunk, his throat torn out. But he wasn't just killed. He was arranged. His arms were spread wide and his hunting knife was driven into the tree bark above his head. Someone or something had posed him. This isn't animal behavior, I said, my voice shaking. Animals don't do this. Maria was scanning the trees with her gun drawn. Then what are we dealing with? Before I could answer, we heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate steps coming through the underbrush. But they weren't steady. They seemed to switch between two-legged and four-legged walking. There! Maria pointed to a shadow moving between the trees. I caught just a glimpse of something that made my mind rebel against what I was seeing. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, and covered in dark fur. But it was walking upright like a man, and its head was wrong. Too long, too sharp, with ears that pointed toward the sky. It turned toward us, and I saw eyes that glowed like yellow fire in the shadows. For just a second, we stared at each other, and then it opened its mouth and let out a sound that was half howl, half human scream. "Run!" I shouted. We crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at our clothes. Behind us, I could hear pursuit. Not just one creature, but several. The sounds they made while running were the worst part, panting and growling mixed with something that sounded like laughter. "The creek!" I gasped, pointing ahead. We splashed into the cold water and ran upstream, hoping the current would mask our scent. The howling surrounded us now, coming from both sides of the creek. They were hurting us, I realized, driving us towards something. "Daniel, look at the water," Maria said. The creek was running red, not rust from the rocks, but actual blood, thick and dark, flowing downstream from somewhere ahead of us. We followed the blood trail around a bend and found the rest of the hunting party. 5 men hung from the branches of a dead cottonwood tree, their bodies arranged in a perfect star pattern. They'd been stripped naked, and their skin was marked with symbols that looked like claw marks, but were too precise, too deliberate to be accidental. "This is ritual," I whispered, my mind flashing back to my grandmother's stories. "They're being judged. Judged for what?" Maria's voice was barely audible. I was about to answer when the howling started again, but this time it was different. This time I could make out words. "Daniel Strong Eagle. The voices called from the darkness. Come home, Daniel. Come back to the old ways. My blood turned to ice. They knew my name. They knew who I was. We need to get to high ground, I said. But even as I spoke, I could see shapes moving in the trees around us. We were surrounded. The largest shape dropped from the branches above us, landing with a thud that shook the ground. It stood on two legs like a man, but its body was covered in dark fur, and its head was the head of a wolf. But wrong, too intelligent, too knowing. Daniel Strongeagle, it said in a voice like grinding stone. You abandoned the sacred places. You forgot the old laws. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, but my hand was shaking as I pointed my gun at the creature. It laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Your grandmother knew. She taught you the stories. The Shunka Warakan guard the sacred places. These men violated the burial ground. They dug up the ancestors' bones looking for artifacts. I felt sick. The hunting party hadn't just been hunting game. They'd been treasure hunting on sacred land. That doesn't give you the right to kill them, Maria said, her gun trained on the creature. We are the law here, it growled. The old law. The law your people forgot when they chose the white man's ways. More shapes emerged from the trees. 7 of them in total, all walking upright, all with the heads of wolves but the intelligence of men. They moved in perfect coordination, like a pack that shared one mind. You will come with us, Daniel Strongeagle, the leader said. You will remember what you truly are. Like hell, Maria said, and opened fire. The bullets hit the creature in the chest, but it didn't go down. It looked at the wounds with mild interest, then backhanded Maria so hard she flew 20 feet and hit a tree with a sickening crack. I ran to her, but I could see it was too late. Her neck was bent at an impossible angle, and her eyes stared sightlessly at the sky. Maria, I screamed, but the pack was already closing in around us. The leader grabbed me by the throat and lifted me off the ground. Its claws pressed against my skin, drawing blood. Now you will learn, it said. Now you will remember what happens to those who forget the old ways. As darkness closed in around me, I heard my grandmother's voice in my memory. The Shunka Warakan are not evil, Daniel. They are balance. They are the price of forgetting who we truly are. I should have listened to her, but now it was too late. I woke up in Birkeness, tied to a wooden post with ropes that felt like they were made from sinew. My head throbbed, and every muscle in my body ached. The smell around me was overwhelming. Wet fur, old, blood, and something else I couldn't identify. As my eyes adjusted, I realized I was in a cave. The walls were covered with paintings that looked ancient. Stick figures of men and wolves, hunting scenes, and symbols that hurt to look at directly. Bones littered the floor, some of them definitely human. You're awake, said a voice from the shadows. I turned my head and saw one of the surviving hunters. Tommy Garrett, according to his name tag. He was tied to another post about 10 feet away, and he looked like he'd been there for days. His eyes were wide with terror, and dried blood covered his shirt. They're not animals, he whispered. They're something else, something that thinks. How long have I been here? I asked. Since yesterday. They brought you in after... He shuddered. After they killed your partner. I'm sorry, man. I really am. The image of Maria's broken body flashed through my mind, and rage built in my chest. What do they want? They want to judge us, Tommy said. They say we violated sacred ground. They say we have to pay for what we did. What did you do? Tommy's face crumpled. We weren't just hunting. Jim had this idea. He'd heard stories about Indian artifacts buried in the park. Arrowheads, pottery, maybe even gold. We dug up this hill, this round hill covered with rocks arranged in circles. My blood went cold. Medicine Hill. You dug up Medicine Hill. We didn't know it was sacred, Tommy pleaded. We just wanted to make some money. We found bones, old bones arranged in patterns, and Jim thought they might be valuable to collectors. You disturbed a burial ground, I said, sick to my stomach. You dug up the ancestors. They killed everyone else, Tommy sobbed. They made me watch. They hung them from trees like ornaments. And they said I had to wait for the moon to be full. They said the judgment had to be complete. I looked up, through a crack in the cave roof. The moon was almost full, just a sliver away from completeness. Maybe one more night. What about me? I asked. Why am I still alive? Before Tommy could answer, footsteps echoed through the cave, heavy, deliberate steps that seemed to shake the walls. The pack leader emerged from the deeper tunnels, his yellow eyes glowing in the dim light. Daniel Strongeagle, he said, his voice like grinding stone. You are awake. Good. It is time for you to understand. Understand what? Why you are here. Why you survived when others did not. He sat down cross-legged in front of me, and for a moment he looked almost human. Your grandmother was Sarah Strongeagle. She knew the old ways. She left offerings on Medicine Hill every full moon for 60 years. How do you know about my grandmother? We spoke with her. She was a bridge between the old world and the new. She taught you the stories, but you forgot them when you chose the white man's path. I thought about my grandmother's stories, the ones I'd dismissed as superstition. Stories about guardians who protected sacred places, about the price of forgetting who we truly are. She asked us to watch over you, the creature continued, to guide you back to the true path when you were ready. But first, you must understand what happens to those who violate the sacred places. He gestured toward the deeper tunnels. Come, see what justice looks like. The ropes fell away from my wrists, cut by claws sharper than any knife. I rubbed the feeling back into my hands, knowing I could run, but also knowing I wouldn't get far. The creature led me deeper into the cave system. The walls here were carved with more symbols, and I could see that some of them were recent. Names and dates, going back decades. This wasn't the first time the pack had judged trespassers. We entered a large chamber lit by what lobe, oaked like phosphorescent moss. In the center of the room was a pit about 10 feet across, filled with something that gleamed white in the strange light. Bones, hundreds of them, arranged in careful patterns. Some were old, weathered, and yellowed with age. Others were fresh, still stained with blood. Every person who has violated the sacred places, the creature said. Every treasure hunter, every thief, every person who thought the old laws didn't apply to them. They all rest here, in service to the ancestors they disturbed. I recognized pieces of modern clothing among the bones. Hiking boots, belt buckles, fragments of camping gear. These weren't just ancient remains. People had been disappearing in these caves for years, maybe decades. The white authorities called them missing persons, the creature continued. Lost hikers, bear attacks. They never understand the truth. This is murder, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. This is justice, the creature replied. The same justice that has protected these lands for 1,000 years. The same justice your grandmother understood. He led me to another chamber, this one smaller and more intimate. The walls here were covered with fresh paintings, done in what looked like blood and charcoal. They showed the hunting party's crimes in detail. Men with shovels digging up carefully arranged bones, disturbing offerings, breaking apart sacred stone circles. They came here to steal, the creature said. They thought the ancestors' bones were curiosities to be sold. They thought sacred objects were trinkets for collectors. Looking at the paintings, I felt a deep shame. These weren't just random graves the hunters had disturbed. These were my ancestors, my people, buried according to traditions that went back centuries. What do you want from me? I asked. Choose, the creature said. You are Lakota. You know the old ways, even if you've forgotten them. You can return to the white world and pretend this never happened, or you can remember who you truly are. And if I remember, then you become what? It your grandmother was, a bridge between worlds, a guardian of the sacred places, a voice that speaks for those who cannot speak for themselves. The creature's eyes bored into mine. But first, you must witness the completion of justice. Tomorrow night, when the moon is full, the last violator will pay the price. And you will watch, so you understand what happens to those who forget the old laws." He turned and walked back toward the entrance, leaving me alone with the bones of the judged. I stood there for a long time thinking about my grandmother's stories, about the path that had led me here, about the choice I was being forced to make. In the distance, I could hear Tommy crying, and somewhere deeper in the caves, the pack was howling in harmony. The sound made something stir in my chest, something I thought I'd lost when I left the reservation. A memory of who I used to be, before I chose the modern world and all its promises. Tomorrow night, under the full moon, I would have to decide what kind of man I wanted to be, and I was beginning to realize that the choice might not be as simple as I thought. The next day dragged by like a nightmare. The pack left me untied, knowing I had nowhere to run. I spent the hours exploring the cave system, trying to understand what I was truly dealing with. The paintings told a story that went back centuries. The Shunka Warakan weren't just monsters. They were guardians, chosen by the spirits to protect sacred places from those who would defile them. They had been here long before the first white settlers, long before the park was established, fulfilling a duty that was older than memory. But they were also something else. In the deeper caves, I found evidence of transformations. Clothing left behind, personal items scattered around ceremonial circles. These weren't just spirit beings. They were people, or had been people. O had chosen to become something more. As the sun set, I could hear the pack gathering in the main chamber. Their howling filled the caves, a sound that seemed to vibrate in my bones. Tommy was sobbing constantly now, knowing his time was running out. When the moon rose full above the cave opening, the pack leader came for us both. "It is time," he said simply. They dragged Tommy to the ceremonial chamber, to a stone altar that was stained dark with old blood. The pack surrounded us, their yellow eyes gleaming in the moonlight that streamed through openings in the cave roof. "Tommy Garrett," the leader said, his voice carrying the weight of judgment. "You have violated the sacred places. You have disturbed the ancestors' rest. You have stolen from the spirit world. How do you answer?" Tommy was beyond speech, just whimpering and trying to shrink into himself. But I found my voice. "He didn't know," I said. "He was ignorant, not evil. Doesn't that count for something?" The leader turned to me. "Ignorance is not innocence, Daniel Strongeagle. A man who shoots his rifle into the darkness is still responsible for what he hits." "Then teach him," I said. "Don't kill him. Let him learn from his mistake." "Some lessons can only be learned through death," the leader replied. "The ancestors demand justice, not education." But I stepped forward, placing myself between Tommy and the pack. I challenged that judgment. The cave fell silent. Even Tommy stopped crying. The pack leader's eyes widened, and for the first time I saw something that might have been surprise. "You invoke the old law?" "I invoke the right of challenge," I said, remembering my grandmother's stories. "If you are truly the guardians of the old ways, then you must honor the old laws. I challenge your judgment of this man." The leader considered this, his head tilted like a real wolf processing new information. "You would stake your life on his ignorance. I would stake my life on his potential for redemption. And if you lose, then we both pay the price." The leader smiled, showing teeth that were too sharp and too many. "Very well, but this is not a challenge of strength, Daniel Strongeagle. This is a challenge of spirit. You must prove that you understand the old ways better than we do." He gestured to the other pack members, who began to move in a circle around us. As they walked, they began to change. Their shapes flowed like water, shifting between human and wolf, sometimes stopping at points in between that were neither and both. "Show us," the leader said, his own form beginning to shift. "Show us that you remember what it means to be Lakota." I closed my eyes and reached deep inside myself, to the place where my grandmother's voice still lived. I thought about the stories she'd told me as a child, about the ceremonies she'd taught me, about the responsibilities that came with being born into the sacred bloodline. When I opened my eyes, The cave had changed. The walls were covered with new paintings, showing scenes from my own life. My childhood on the reservation, my grandmother's teachings, my journey into the white world, my struggles with alcohol, my slow journey back to understanding. "You abandoned the sacred places," the leader said, his voice now coming from everywhere and nowhere. "You chose the white man's path." "I lost my way," I admitted. "But I never stopped being Lakota. I never stopped carrying the ancestors' blood." "Prove it." The test came from within. I felt my own spirit beginning to change, to shift the way the pack members did. But where they became wolves, I became something else. A bridge between worlds. A keeper of balance, a voice for the voiceless. I spoke in Lakota, using words my grandmother had taught me, telling the story of the sacred places and why they must be protected. I spoke of the balance between old and new, between tradition and progress, between judgment and mercy. The pack listened, their glowing eyes fixed on me. As I spoke, I felt the power of my ancestors flowing through me, giving strength to my words. "Tommy Garrett violated the sacred places," I said finally. "But he can also serve them. Let him live, and I will teach him the old ways. Let him become a guardian instead of a victim." The leader had fully transformed now, standing 9 feet tall, his wolf head crowned with antlers that gleamed like silver. "And you, Daniel Strong Eagle, what will you become?" I looked at Tommy, then at the pack, then up at the full moon shining through the cave opening. "What I was always meant to be," I said. "A bridge between worlds." The leader nodded slowly. "The ancestors have spoken through you. The judgment is altered." He raised his clawed hand, and I felt a burning sensation across my chest. When I looked down, I saw that he had marked me with symbols that looked like the ones on the cave walls. "You are pack friend now," he said. "You carry the responsibility of the guardians. This man lives because you have vouched for him. His failures are your failures. His redemption is your redemption." Tommy collapsed to his knees, sobbing with relief. But I knew the real test was just beginning. "We will be watching," the leader said. "Both of you. The sacred places have many guardians, and now you are one of them." As the pack began to melt back into the shadows, I helped Tommy to his feet. We were alive, but we were also forever changed. The old world and the new world had collided, and somehow we had survived the crash. We found our way out of the caves just as the sun was rising. The morning light felt harsh after the darkness, and both Tommy and I stumbled like blind men getting used to sight. The pack had left us supplies, water, food, and a map showing the way back to the main road. But they had also left us with something else, the knowledge that the world was far stranger and more dangerous than we had ever imagined. Tommy didn't speak during the long walk back to civilization. He just followed behind me, his eyes wide and vacant, like a man who had set in too much. I knew how he felt. My own mind was struggling to process what had happened, to make sense of the choice I had made. When we finally reached the ranger station, Jim Martinez was waiting with a search and rescue team. They'd been looking for us for 2 days, ever since our radio went silent. "Jesus, Daniel," Jim said, looking at our torn clothes and exhausted faces. "What happened out there?" I looked at Tommy, who was staring at the ground and shaking. Then I looked at Jim, a good man who had given me a second chance and deserved the truth. But how could I tell him about the pack, about the caves, about the choice between worlds? "Wolf attack," I said finally. "We lost Maria. The hunters are all dead." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was true enough. The official report would list Maria Santos as killed by wolves, along with the Minneapolis hunting party. The incident would be used to justify new restrictions on hunting in the remote areas of the park. Tommy never spoke about what really happened. He quit his job in Minneapolis and moved back to his family's farm in Iowa. But every month, he sent me a letter with pictures of the small shrine he'd built in his backyard, a place where he left offerings and said prayers for the ancestors he'd disturbed. He was learning the old ways, just as I had promised the pack he would. As for me, I threw myself into my work with a new sense of purpose. I became the ranger who knew the most about the remote areas, the one who could track anything and find anyone. But I also became something else, a guardian of the sacred places, a bridge between the old world and the new. I learned to read the signs that showed when the pack was active, coyotes fleeing the area, cattle mutilations that followed specific patterns, hikers who reported seeing large wolves in areas where wolves hadn't been seen for decades, when trias, boar hunters or artifact thieves entered the park. I found ways to discourage them. Sometimes a friendly warning was enough. Sometimes I had to get creative, equipment failures, getting lost, mysterious illnesses that only cleared up after they left the sacred areas. But sometimes, despite my efforts, people went too far. They dug up burial sites, stole sacred objects, defiled the places where the ancestors rested. When that happened, I would find the evidence of their crimes and quietly radio in reports of wolf activity in the area. The pack would take care of the rest. I never saw them again directly, but I knew they were watching. Sometimes on nights when the moon was full, I would hear their howling in the distance. It no longer sounded like a threat. It sounded like a greeting, a reminder that I was not alone in my duties. My drinking problem never returned. How could it? I had found something stronger than alcohol, something that gave my life meaning and purpose. I had found my true calling as a guardian of the sacred places. Years passed. I trained new rangers, taught them to respect the land and the people who had lived here long before the park was established. I worked with tribal councils to establish better protections for cultural sites. I became a voice for the voiceless, just as the pack leader had said. But I never forgot the price of my choice. Every full moon, I would visit Medicine Hill, the place where the hunting party had dug up the ancestors' bones. I would leave offerings and say prayers not just for the dead, but for the living who had lost their way. The modern world keeps pushing into the sacred places, keeps forgetting the old laws. Developers want to build resorts. Mining companies want to dig for minerals. Tourists want to take souvenirs. They see the land as a resource to be exploited, not a sacred trust to be protected. But the guardians are still here, watching from the shadows, enforcing the old laws in their own way. The pack still runs through the Badlands, still judges those who violate the sacred places, and I am still here, still serving as a bridge between worlds, still trying to prevent the conflicts that arise when the old and new collide. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had made a different choice that night in the cave. If I had chosen the safety of ignorance over the burden of knowledge. If I had let Tommy die and walked away from the old ways forever. But then I remember my grandmother's words. The Shunka Warakin are not evil, Daniel. They are balance. They are the price of forgetting who we truly are. The price of remembering is heavy, but it's a price worth paying. Because some boundaries are written in blood and enforced by Fang, and someone has to make sure they are never crossed. The pack is still out there, still watching, still waiting. And I am still here, still serving as their voice in the modern world. Some things never change. Some laws are older than governments, older than civilization itself. And some guardians never rest, never retire, never stop protecting the sacred places from those who would defile them. The Badlands remember, the ancestors remember, and the pack remembers. We are still here. My name is Rebecca Moonfeather, and I've been a park ranger at Lake Tahoe for 11 years. I'm telling you this story because someone needs to know what really happened that summer. Someone needs to understand why those children died. I'm 29 years old, and my great-grandmother was Washoe. She used to tell me stories about the lake when I was little. Stories I didn't believe, stories I wish I had listened to. August 1994 was the hottest summer anyone could remember. The lake was lower than it had been in 50 years. Rocks that nobody had seen before were sticking up out of the water like broken teeth. The tourists kept coming anyway, maybe even more than usual. Kids everywhere, splashing and laughing, not knowing what was waiting for them down in the deep, dark water. I was 3 months pregnant then. My husband Jake had died in a climbing accident just 2 months before. I was trying to keep working, trying to stay busy, trying not to think about raising a baby alone. The lake had always been my safe place. I knew every inch of it. I'd saved more than 200 people from drowning over the years. I was good at my job. But that summer, something was wrong. The fish were dying. Not just a few here and there, but hundreds of them, floating belly up in the morning sun. The water temperature was dropping in weird spots, like invisible cold rivers running through the warm lake. And the sounds, God, the sounds. I worked with my partner, Steve Hamilton. He'd been a ranger for 15 years, a good man with steady hands and a calm voice. We'd pull people out of the water together, give them CPR, send them home to their families. It was hard work, but it felt right. It felt like we were making a difference. The first drowning happened on a Tuesday morning. A little girl named Amy Chen, 8 years old, from San Francisco. Her parents said she was a strong swimmer. They'd only looked away for a minute. We found her body in 60 feet of water, way out in the middle of Emerald Bay. There was no way she could have swum that far. No way she could have gotten there alone. And when the medical examiner looked at her, he found something strange. There was no water in her lungs. None at all. How does someone drown without water in their lungs? I asked Steve as we filled out the paperwork. He shrugged, but I could see the worry in his eyes. Maybe she hit her head. Maybe she was unconscious when she went under. I wanted to believe that. I really did. 3 days later, it happened again. Tommy Martinez, 6 years old, from Nevada, strong swimmer, parents watching, found in deep water with no explanation. And again, no water in his lungs. By the time the third child died, I knew we were dealing with something that couldn't be explained in any report. Something that would make people think we were crazy if we tried to tell them the truth. But I'm telling you anyway because you need to know. You need to understand that some places hold on to their sadness. Some places never let go. The third child was named Sarah Williams, and she was only 5 years old. Blonde hair, blue eyes, wearing a bright pink swimsuit with little flowers on it. Her mother was reading a book on the beach, maybe 20 feet away. Her father was building a sandcastle with Sarah's older brother. I was patrolling the bay in our rescue boat when I heard the screaming. Not the normal kind of screaming you hear at a beach. Kids playing, having fun. This was pure terror. The kind of sound that makes your blood turn to ice. I gunned the engine and got there in less than 2 minutes. The mother was waist deep in the water, spinning in circles, crying and calling Sarah's name. The father was diving down, coming up, diving down again, his face getting more desperate each two. She was right here, the mother kept saying. She was right here. Steve and I put on our gear and went down. The water was so clear you could see 50 feet easy, and there she was, little Sarah, sitting on the bottom like she was waiting for us. Her eyes were open, looking up at the surface. She looked peaceful, like she was just resting. But she was sitting in 80 feet of water. No 5-year-old could swim that deep. No 5-year-old would even try. When we brought her up, I noticed something else. The water around her was ice cold. Not just cool, but freezing, like someone had dumped a truck full of ice cubes right in that spot. The rest of the lake was warm, normal for August. But in that one place, it was like winter. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Sarah's face, those open eyes, staring up at nothing. I kept thinking about the cold water, and the way she'd been sitting so still, so calm. Around 3 in the morning, I got up and made some coffee. I sat at my kitchen table and looked out at the lake. The moon was full, and the water looked like liquid silver, beautiful and deadly. That's when I saw them. At first, I thought it was just the moonlight playing tricks on my eyes, shapes moving on the water like shadows dancing. But then I realized the shapes had form. They looked like children, small figures moving across the surface of the lake like they were walking on solid ground. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I must be seeing things. Pregnant women have weird dreams, right? Stress can make you see things that aren't there. But when I looked again, they were still there. A dozen of them, maybe more. Children in old-fashioned clothes, moving in a line across the water. And they were all looking at me. I grabbed my binoculars and focused on the water. The figures were clearer now. I could see their faces. They were kids, all right, but something was wrong with them. Their skin was too pale, their eyes too dark, and they were all soaking wet, like they'd just climbed out of the lake. One of them raised a hand and pointed at me, and then another. Soon they were all pointing, all staring at my window with those dark, dark eyes. I stepped back from the window, my heart beating so fast I thought it might burst. When I looked again, they were gone. The lake was empty, just moonlight on calm water, but I could still feel them watching me. The next morning I told Steve what I'd seen. He listened without interrupting, his face getting more serious with each word. "You're under a lot of stress," he said finally. "Losing Jake, the baby coming, these drownings. It's a lot." "I know what I saw, Steve." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My grandmother used to tell stories about this lake, Washoe stories. She said there were children who died here a long time ago. She said they were still looking for their families. You think I'm crazy? I think you're seeing things that maybe the rest of us can't see, or don't want to see." That afternoon we got the call about the fourth drowning. A boy named Michael Peterson, 7 years old. By the time we got there, we knew what we'd find. Deep water, no explanation, no water in his lungs. But this time was different. This time, as we pulled his body to the surface, I felt something grab my ankle, something small and strong, like a child's hand. I looked down through my diving mask and saw a face staring up at me. A little girl with long dark hair floating around her head like seaweed. Her eyes were black holes in her pale face, and her mouth was moving, trying to say something. I jerked my leg away and shot to the surface, gasping and choking. Steve was there in seconds, pulling me into the boat. "What happened? What's wrong?" I couldn't speak. I just pointed at the water, at the spot where I'd seen the face. We both stared down into the depths, but there was nothing there. Just darkness and the body of another dead child. After what happened with Michael Peterson, I started carrying a small tape recorder with me. I needed proof. I needed something to show people that I wasn't losing my mind. The next week, 3 more children died. All the same way. All in deep water where they couldn't have swum. All with no water in their lungs. The parents were going crazy. The local news was calling it a mysterious drowning epidemic. The lake patrol was doubled, but it didn't matter. The children kept dying. Steve and I started diving together every day, searching for clues. We found things down there that shouldn't have been there. Stone circles that looked like they'd been made by hands. Pieces of pottery that looked ancient. And always, always that circle of freezing water where the children were found. On Thursday, we were diving near the place where Sarah Williams had died when my radio crackled to life. But instead of the dispatcher's voice, I heard something else. Children singing, a song I didn't recognize in a language I didn't understand. I looked at Steve through his diving mask and pointed at my radio. He nodded and pointed at his. He was hearing it too. The singing got louder, more voices joining in. I could feel the sound vibrating through the water, through my chest, through my bones. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time, like a lullaby sung by ghosts. Then I saw them. They came up from the deepest part of the lake, rising like bubbles. Dozens of children, all different ages, all wearing clothes from different times. Some looked like they were from the 1800s with long dresses and buttoned shoes. Others wore more modern clothes, but faded and torn. They moved through the water like they belonged there, like they were swimming through air. Their hair flowed around their faces and their eyes. Their eyes were so sad, so lonely. They surrounded us, forming a circle. I tried to swim up, but they moved with me, staying close. One of them, a girl who looked about 10, reached out and touched my diving mask. Her fingers were ice cold even through the glass. She opened her mouth and sprung out. Okay, and somehow I could hear her voice even underwater. "Sister," she said, "you have little ones coming. We can help. We can keep them safe." I shook my head and tried to swim away, but more hands reached for me. Gentle hands, but so many of them. They were all trying to touch me, to hold me, to pull me deeper. Steve grabbed my arm and hit the inflate button on my diving vest. We shot to the surface like rockets, gasping and choking. The boat was 50 yards away, but we made it in record time. "Did you hear them?" I asked as we climbed aboard. Steve nodded, his face pale. They were speaking Washoe, Old Washoe, my grandmother's language. What did they say? They said they were lonely. They said they wanted to play. They said the new children reminded them of home. That night I called my great-grandmother. She was 92 and lived in a nursing home in Carson City, but her mind was still sharp. When I told her what was happening, she was quiet for a long time. "Grandmother, are you there?" "I'm here, child. I'm just remembering. There was a time long ago when the soldiers came to the lake. They chased our people, trying to force us onto the reservation. Some families tried to hide by going into the lake. The children couldn't swim well enough. They drowned trying to escape." "How many children?" "Dozens, maybe more. They were buried in the deep water, but their spirits never left. They've been waiting all this time, waiting for their families to come get them." "Why are they taking the other children now?" "The lake is lower than it's been in many years. Their resting place is disturbed. And they're lonely, Rebecca. They've been alone for so long they don't remember the difference between the living and the dead." I thought about the way they'd looked at me, the way they'd called me sister. "What do they want from me?" You carry life inside you. They can sense it. They think maybe you can help them find their way home." The next morning, I found Steve waiting by the boat. His face was grim. "Another one," he said. "Twin girls this time. Emma and Olivia Santos, both 4 years old." When we got to the scene, both parents were in the water, diving again and again, refusing to give up. The girls had been playing in the shallows, building mud pies. Their mother had turned away for just a moment to get sunscreen from her bag. We found them together, holding hands, sitting on the bottom in 90 feet of water. They looked like they were sleeping, peaceful and calm, but the water around them was so cold it hurt to touch. As we brought them up, I felt that familiar tug on my ankle. This time, I didn't fight it. I let myself sink a little and looked down. There were more of them now. So many more. They filled the water below us like an underwater crowd, all looking up with those dark, hungry eyes. And in the center of them all was a girl who looked about my age. She was wearing a long dress that moved around her like it was alive. She pointed at me, then at my stomach, then at herself. The message was clear. She wanted my baby. She wanted to take my unborn child and add it to her collection. I shook my head and started swimming up, but the water around me turned to ice. My muscles seized up and I couldn't move. The girl rose toward me, her mouth opening in a smile that showed too many teeth. Steve grabbed me and pulled me up just as everything went black. I woke up in the hospital with Steve holding my hand. The doctor said I'd had a panic attack, that the stress of the job and my pregnancy had finally caught up with me. They wanted to keep me overnight for observation. But I couldn't stay. I knew the spirits wouldn't wait. I knew they were planning something bigger. I checked myself out against medical advice and drove straight to the lake. The sun was setting, painting the water red and gold. It should have been beautiful, but all I could think about was the darkness underneath. Steve was waiting for me at the ranger station. He'd been thinking too, and he'd come to the same conclusion I had. "They're not going to stop," he said. "More kids are going to die unless we do something." "What can we do? How do you fight ghosts?" "My grandmother always said you don't fight them. You help them. You give them what they need, so they can rest." I touched my belly, feeling the small life growing inside. "They want my baby. No, they want to go home. They want to be with their families. They're just confused. They've been alone so long they don't remember the difference between helping and hurting." That night we took the boat out to the deepest part of the lake. The water was perfectly still, like black glass. Steve had brought his grandmother's medicine bag filled with sage and sweetgrass and other things I didn't recognize. "What if this doesn't work?" I asked. "Then we'll think of something else, but Rebecca, if something happens to me, promise me you'll get out of the water. Promise me you'll save yourself and the baby." I wanted to argue, but I could see he was serious. "I promise." Steve lit the sage and began to sing. It was the same song I'd heard underwater, the same melody that had vibrated through my bones. But this time, it didn't sound scary. It sounded like a prayer. The water around our boat began to glow. Not bright, just a soft, blue-green light that seemed to come from far below. And then they started rising. First one, then 10, then dozens. All the children who had died in the lake, all the spirits who had been waiting for so long. They came up slowly, carefully, like they were afraid of scaring us away. The girl in the old dress was with them, the one who had tried to take my baby. But she looked different now. Younger, sadder, more like a lost child than a monster. She spoke in Washoe, and Steve translated. She says she's sorry. She says they didn't mean to hurt anyone. They just wanted to play. They wanted friends. I leaned forward, my hands on the side of the boat. Tell her I understand. Tell her I want to help. Steve spoke to her in Washoe, and she nodded. Then she said something else, longer this time. She says the other children, the ones who drowned this summer, they're here too. They're confused. They don't understand why they can't go home. Where are they? The girl pointed toward the deepest part of the lake. And then I saw them. The modern children, the ones who had died in the past few weeks. They were floating just under the surface, looking lost and scared. Amy Chen was there, and Tommy Martinez, and little Sarah Williams. All of them, waiting for someone to tell them what to do. They're not dead, I whispered. Not really. They're just trapped. The girl in the old dress nodded. She spoke again, and this time I could understand her without Steve's translation. Maybe it was the pregnancy, maybe it was my Washoe blood, but her words came through clear as glass. Help us, she said. Help us find the way home. I stood up in the boat, my heart pounding. What do you need me to do? Sing with us. Call to the spirits of our families. Tell them we're here. Tell them we're ready to go. I looked at Steve. He nodded and started singing again, the old Washoe song my great-grandmother had taught him. I joined in, even though I didn't know all the words. The spirits sang with us, their voices rising from the water like mist. The lake began to change. The water turned silver, then gold, then a color I'd never seen before. And in that strange light, I saw them. The families of the drowned children, the parents and grandparents and brothers and sisters who had been waiting on the other side. They came walking across the water, their arms outstretched, their faces full of love and longing. The spirit children ran to them, laughing and crying at the same time. Families reunited after more than a century of separation. But the modern so-calls, children, the ones who had died this summer, they hung back. They were afraid, confused. They didn't understand what was happening. I reached out to them, my voice gentle. It's okay. Your families are waiting for you too. You just have to let go. One by one, they began to fade. Not disappearing, but becoming lighter, more transparent. They were going home, crossing over to wherever their families were waiting. Sarah Williams was the last to go. She looked at me with those big blue eyes and smiled. Thank you, she whispered. Then she was gone. The lake returned to normal, dark and still. The spirits were gone, all of them. Finally, at peace. But as we turned to go back to shore, I felt something wrong. The boat was taking on water, and Steve was slumped over the wheel. Steve. I shook him, but he didn't respond. His skin was ice cold and his lips were blue. Steve, wake up. He opened his eyes and looked at me, but there was something different about him, something distant. I have to go with them, he said. They showed me my grandmother. She's waiting for me. No, you can't leave me here. But he was already fading, becoming transparent like the other spirits. Take care of yourself, Rebecca. Take care of the baby. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in a sinking boat in the middle of the lake. I made it to shore, barely. The boat went down about 100 yards from the beach, and I had to swim the rest of the way. Cold water, dark night, and me, 3 months pregnant. I shouldn't have made it, but I did. And I think I know why. The spirits were gone, but they'd left something behind. A kind of peace, a sense that the lake was clean again, safe again. The water felt different when I swam through it, warmer somehow, even though the night was cold. I called for help from a payphone at the marina, told them Steve's boat had capsized, that he'd drowned trying to save me. They never found his body, but that didn't surprise me. He wasn't down there anymore. He was somewhere else, somewhere better. The drownings stopped after that night. Completely. The lake went back to being what it had always been before that terrible summer, a place where families came to swim and play and make happy memories. I stayed on as a ranger for another 5 years, had my daughter, Maria, and raised her by the lake. She's 28 now, a marine biologist, and she has the same gift I do. She can see things in the water that other people can't, feel things that others miss. But she's not afraid of it like I was. She understands that some spirits are helpers, not hurters, that the lake has a memory, and sometimes that memory needs to be honored. We built a small memorial on the shore of Emerald Bay. Nothing fancy, just a circle of stones with a plaque that says, "For the children who found their way home." Most people think it's for the kids who drowned that summer. They don't know about the others, the ones who waited so long. Every year on the anniversary of that night, I go out to the lake and sing the old Washoe song, just to let them know they're not forgotten, just to make sure they stay at peace. Sometimes when the moon is full and the water is still, I can see them playing in the shallows. Not the scary, desperate spirits they were before, but happy children, safe with their families. They wave at me sometimes and I wave back. The lake is peaceful now, but it's not empty. It never was, and it never will be. Some places hold on to their stories, their joys and sorrows, their love and loss. Lake Tahoe is one of those places. And that's okay, because now I know the difference between spirits who need help and spirits who want to help. The children who died that summer taught me that. Steve taught me that. Even the ancient spirits, in their confused and desperate way, taught me that. My daughter is teaching her own children about the lake now, about respecting the water, about listening to the stories it tells, about remembering, that some tears never stop falling, and some children never grow up. But some children do find their way home, and sometimes if you're quiet and patient and willing to listen, you can help them get there. The lake remembers everything, and now so do I. My name is Anthony Ravencrow, and I've been working at Carlsbad Caverns for 17 years. I know every tunnel, every crack, every shadow in those caves. People think I'm crazy for spending so much time underground, but the darkness never scared me, at least not until September of 1996. I'm part Mescalero Apache, and my grandmother used to tell stories about spirits that lived in dark places. She called them Chindi, evil things that fed on the living. I never believed those old tales. I was a park ranger, trained in cave rescue. I dealt with facts, not ghost stories. But that September, everything changed. The first sign something was wrong came during morning briefing. My partner, Lisa Blackhorse, was reading the bat count reports, and her face went pale. "Anthony, look at this," she said, sliding the papers across the table. "The bats are leaving early, 3 weeks before they should." I looked at the numbers. For the past week, thousands of bats had been flying out of the cave and not coming back. These weren't normal migration patterns. The bats seemed scared of something. "Maybe it's the weather," I said. But even I didn't believe it. That same morning, we got a call from the research station. Dr. Martin Cole and his team had been mapping the deep passages for 2 weeks. They were supposed to check in every day, but nobody had heard from them in 3 days. "We need to go find them," Lisa said. I nodded, grabbing my gear. Cave rescue was my specialty. In 17 years, I'd brought 89 people out of those caves alive. I wasn't about to break that record now. The thing was, I needed this job. My daughter Sarah had been diagnosed with leukemia 6 months earlier, and the treatment was expensive. Without the Park Service insurance, I couldn't afford to help her. So when the chief ranger told me to find those researchers, I was going to find them. We gear. Teed up and headed for the elevator that would take us down to the lower cave. The lower cave was off limits to tourists, too dangerous, too many unmarked passages. Only trained personnel were allowed down there. As we descended, I noticed something odd. The cave felt different. After 17 years, you get a sense for these things. The air felt heavier, and there was a smell I couldn't identify. It was like copper, but stronger, almost metallic. "You smell that?" I asked Lisa. She nodded. "Been getting stronger all week." When we reached the lower cave, our helmet lights cut through the darkness. The researchers had been working in Section C, about half a mile from the main passage. We followed the marked route, our boots echoing off the limestone walls. The first thing we found was their equipment. Backpacks, notebooks, and surveying tools were scattered across the cave floor like someone had dropped everything and run. But run from what? "This doesn't look right," Lisa said, kneeling beside an overturned surveying kit. "Look at this." She pointed to the cave wall. There were marks scratched into the limestone, long, deep gouges that looked almost like claw marks. But what could make marks like that in solid rock? I ran my fingers along the scratches. They were fresh, with tiny flakes of stone still clinging to the edges, and they were too big to be made by any animal I knew. "Maybe they used some kind of tool," I said, but the words sounded hollow even to me. That's when our lights started acting up. First Lisa's helmet lamp flickered, then mine. We both had fresh batteries, but the beams were getting weaker. "Check your backup," I told her. We both switched to our backup lights, but they were dim too. In all my years of cave rescue, I'd never seen anything like it. "Anthony," Lisa whispered, "look at the wall." I turned and saw what she was pointing at. There was a slimy trail running along the cave wall about 8 feet off the ground. It glowed with a faint green light, like some kind of phosphorescent slime. "What is that?" she asked. I didn't know. I'd never seen anything like it in 17 years of working these caves. We kept moving deeper into the cave system, following the trail of abandoned equipment. The metallic smell was getting stronger, and I was starting to feel something I hadn't felt in years. Real fear. That's when we found Dr. Cole. He was lying in a small chamber about 50 feet from the main passage. At first glance, it looked like he was sleeping. But when I knelt beside him and turned him over, I saw the truth. Dr. Martin Cole was dead, but he didn't look like any corpse I'd ever seen. His skin was pale white, almost translucent. His eyes were wide open, staring at nothing, and his body looked empty, like something had drained all the life out of him. "Jesus," Lisa whispered. "What happened to him?" I checked for a pulse, knowing I wouldn't find one. His skin was cold and dry. There were no visible wounds, no signs of violence, but something had definitely killed him. "We need to call this in," I said, reaching for my radio. But when I tried to make contact with the surface, all I got was static. The radio had worked fine when we came down, but now it was dead. "Maybe it's the depth," Lisa said. "Too much rock between us and the surface." I tried moving to different spots in the chamber, but the radio stayed dead. We were on our own down here. That's when I heard it, a sound like scratching coming from somewhere deep in the cave. It was faint at first, but it was getting louder, and it was coming from the direction we needed to go. "Did you hear that?" I asked Lisa. She nodded, her face pale in the dim light. "It sounds like something moving in the walls." The scratching continued for about 30 seconds, then stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. I knew we should head back to the surface and get help, but there were still 3 researchers missing, and in Dr. Cole's body needed to be recovered. I couldn't leave them down here. "We keep going," I said, "but we stay together, no splitting up." Lisa nodded, though I could see she was scared. Hell, I was scared too. We left Dr. Cole's body and continued deeper into the cave. The passage was getting narrower and the walls seemed to be closing in. Our lights were still dim, casting weird shadows that seemed to move when we weren't looking directly at them. After about 10 minutes of walking, we came to a junction I'd never seen before. The passage split into 3 different tunnels, each one disappearing into darkness. "This isn't on any map," Lisa said, consulting her chart. "These tunnels shouldn't be here." I studied the walls around the junction. The rock was smooth, too smooth. It looked like it had been carved, but not by water or normal geological processes. The surface was almost perfectly round, like something had melted its way through the stone. "Which way?" Lisa asked. I was about to suggest we go back when I heard something that made my blood freeze. It was a voice, speaking in a language I hadn't heard since my grandmother died. It was Apache, but not the modern Apache I knew. This was older, the ancient tongue my grandmother had whispered during her stories about the Chindi. The voice was coming from the middle tunnel. "Did you understand that?" Lisa asked. I had understood it, though I wished I hadn't. The voice had said, "The sleepers wake, the seals are broken, the harvest begins." "We need to go back," I said. But before we could move, we heard something else. A human scream echoing from the depths of the middle tunnel. One of the researchers was still alive. "We have to help them," Lisa said. I knew she was right. It was our job to save people, no matter what we might face down there. But as we entered that smooth-walled tunnel, I had the feelings. Gee, we were walking into something that would change our lives forever. The tunnel curved downward, taking us deeper into the earth. The walls were covered with that same phosphorescent slime, giving off just enough light to see by. Our helmet lamps were almost useless now, putting out barely more light than a candle. After about 5 minutes of walking, we came to a large chamber, and what we saw there made us both stop dead in our tracks. There were symbols carved into the walls, Apache symbols that I recognized from my grandmother's stories. They were warning signs, markers that meant danger and evil and keep out. But someone had broken them. The carved lines were cracked and damaged, like they'd been deliberately destroyed. In the center of the chamber was a circle of stones, and scattered around the circle were bones. Human bones that looked very old. This wasn't just a cave, it was a burial site, a sacred place that had been disturbed. "Anthony," Lisa whispered. "Look." She was pointing to the far side of the chamber. There, sitting with his back against the wall, was one of the missing researchers. He was alive, but something was wrong with him. His eyes were open, but they weren't focused on anything. And his lips were moving, speaking in that same ancient Apache tongue. We approached him carefully. When I knelt beside him, I could see that his skin had the same pale, drained look as Dr. Cole's, but he was still breathing. "Can you hear me?" I asked. He turned his head toward me, and for a moment his eyes seemed to focus. Then he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "It's awake," he whispered in English. "We broke the seals. God help us, we broke the seals." Then he started speaking Apache again, the same words over and over. "The sleepers wake. The seals are broken. The harvest begins." That's when we heard the roar. The sound that echoed through the chamber wasn't made by any animal I knew. It was deep and angry, like a bull mixed with a lion, but with something else underneath it, something that sounded almost human. The researcher's grip on my arm tightened. "It knows we're here," he whispered. "It can smell the life in us." The roar came again, closer this time, and with it came that metallic smell, so strong now that it made my eyes water. It was the smell of blood, lots of blood. "We need to get out of here," Lisa said, but her voice was shaking. I tried to help the researcher to his feet, but he was too weak to stand. Whatever had happened to him had drained most of his strength. "Leave me," he said. "Take the warning to the surface. Tell them to seal the cave, forever." "I'm not leaving you," I said. But before I could argue further, we heard something that made us all freeze. It was the sound of something large moving through the stone walls around us. Not through the passages, through the solid rock itself. The phosphorescent slime on the walls started glowing brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat. And in that green light I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. There were eyes watching us from the darkness. Multiple sets of eyes, glowing with the same green light as the slime. They were about 8 feet off the ground, and they were getting closer. "Run," the researcher whispered. "Run now." We didn't need to be told twice. Lisa and I grabbed the researcher under his arms and started dragging him toward the entrance. But we only made it a few steps before the thing showed itself. It came through the wall like the stone was water. One moment the wall was solid rock. The next moment something was pushing through it like it was made of mud. The thing was huge, at least 9 feet tall, with arms that hung down to its knees. Its skin was the same color as the slime, glowing with that sickly green light. And its face, God, its face was like something out of a nightmare. It had the general shape of a human face, but stretched and distorted. The eyes were too large, glowing like lanterns, as the mouth was too wide, filled with rows of sharp teeth. And when it smiled at us, I could see that some of those teeth were stained with blood. "Fresh meat," it said in perfect English. "It's been so long since I tasted fear." The researcher in our arms started screaming, not in pain but in terror. "The Chindi," he yelled. "It's the Chindi." The thing laughed, a sound like breaking glass mixed with a baby's cry. "Your grandmother's stories were true, Anthony Ravencrow, but she never told you how we feed, did she? It knew my name. Somehow, this thing knew who I was." "How do you—" I started to ask. "I know many things," it said, stepping closer. "I know about your daughter, about her sickness, about your fears." Lisa was trying to pull me toward the exit, but I couldn't move. The thing's eyes were holding me in place, like a snake hypnotizing its prey. "I can cure her," it said. "All I need is a little taste. Just a small portion of your life force, and she'll be healthy again." For a moment I was tempted. Sarah was dying, and the treatments weren't working. If this thing could really save her— "Don't listen to it," Lisa said, her voice cutting through my thoughts. "It's lying." The thing's smile faded. "So be it. I'll take what I need anyway." It raised one of its hands, and I saw that its fingers ended in long, sharp claws. But before it could strike, Lisa did something that probably saved our lives. She started speaking in Apache, not the ancient tongue, but the modern language her grandmother had taught her. She was reciting a blessing, a prayer of protection that my own grandmother had taught me years ago. The thing hissed and pulled back, like her words were causing it physical pain. "Run!" she yelled. This time we ran, dragging the researcher with us. Behind us, the thing was roaring in anger, and I could hear it smashing through the stone walls in pursuit. We made it to the tunnel, but our lights were almost dead now. We were running through near total darkness, guided only by the faint glow of the slime on the walls. "It's gaining on us," Lisa panted. I could hear it too, the sound of claws scraping against stone, getting closer with each step. The researcher was slowing us down, but I refused to leave him behind. We reached the junction where the 3 tunnels met. I was about to head for the passage that led back to the surface when I heard something that made me change direction. Screaming. Human screaming, coming from the right-hand tunnel. "The others," Lisa said. "They're still alive." I knew we should head for the surface, but I couldn't leave people behind. It went against everything I'd been trained to do. "This way," I said, turning toward the screams. The right-hand tunnel was different from the others. The walls were rough, carved by water over thousands of years. This was a natural passage, not something created by that thing. The screaming was getting louder. We were getting close. That's when the tunnel opened into another chamber, and we saw what was left of the research team. There were 2 of them, both still alive but trapped in some kind of web. It wasn't made of silk like a spider's web, but of the same glowing slime we'd seen on the walls. They were stuck fast, unable to move, and standing over them was the thing, its claws extended toward the nearest researcher. "No!" I yelled. It turned toward us, and I saw that its mouth was covered in blood. Fresh blood. "Too late," it said. "The harvest has begun." It reached out and touched the researcher with one claw. The man's eyes went wide, and I watched in horror as his skin started to turn pale. The thing was draining his life force, just like it had done to Dr. Cole. Lisa was still reciting the Apache blessing, but it wasn't working as well now. The thing seemed to be getting stronger. "The seals are broken," it said, its voice echoing off the chamber walls. "After centuries of imprisonment, I am free, and I am hungry, the rest too." Urcher it was touching collapsed, his body as drained and empty as Dr. Cole's had been. The thing turned its attention to the other trapped man. "Stop!" I yelled, but I knew it was useless. That's when I remembered something my grandmother had told me, something about the old ways of fighting evil spirits. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small medicine bag I'd carried since I was a boy. It contained sage and other sacred herbs blessed by the tribal elders. I opened the bag and threw the contents at the thing. The herbs hit its skin and started to smoke. The creature screamed and pulled back, its skin burning where the herbs had touched it. But I could see it was only a temporary reprieve. The thing was too strong, and I didn't have enough blessed herbs to stop it permanently. "We need to get out of here," I said to Lisa. But when I turned around, I saw that the thing had blocked the entrance to the chamber. We were trapped. "Now you'll join your friends," it said, advancing toward us with its claws extended. That's when Lisa did something that I'll never forget. She pulled off her helmet and threw it at the thing, then ran straight at it. "Get them out of here," she yelled. The thing's claws raked across her chest, and I saw her blood spray across the chamber walls. But her sacrifice gave me the time I needed. Lisa's body hit the ground, and I saw the light go out of her eyes. She was dead. My partner, my friend, was gone. But her sacrifice had given me a chance. The thing was feeding on her life force, distracted by the fresh blood. I grabbed the remaining researcher and started pulling him toward a crack in the chamber wall I'd noticed earlier. "Where are you going?" the thing called after me. "You cannot escape. This is my domain now." The crack was barely wide enough for a human to squeeze through, but it was our only chance. I pushed the researcher through first, then followed him into the narrow passage. Behind us, the thing was roaring in anger. It was too big to follow us through the crack, but I could hear it trying to widen the opening with its claws. The passage was so narrow we had to crawl on our hands and knees. The researcher was barely conscious, mumbling in Apache about broken seals and ancient warnings. I was dragging him through the darkness, guided only by the faint air current that suggested an opening ahead. After what felt like hours, we emerged into a chamber I'd never seen before. But this one was different. The walls were covered with Apache symbols, not the broken ones we'd seen earlier, but intact warnings and protective prayers. In the center of the chamber was a stone altar, and on it were the remains of what looked like a very old Native American burial. But this wasn't just any burial. It was a shaman's grave, surrounded by medicine bags and sacred objects. "This is where they imprisoned it," the researcher whispered. "This is the original prison." I looked around the chamber and began to understand. The symbols on the walls weren't just warnings. They were part of a binding spell. The Apache shamans had trapped the thing here centuries ago, using their sacred knowledge to keep it contained. "Your research team broke the seals," I said. He nodded weakly. "We didn't know. We thought they were just primitive decorations. We scraped them off the walls to get better photographs." The sound of claws scraping against stone echoed through the chamber. The thing had found another way in. "Is there a way to repair the seals?" I asked. "Maybe," he said. "But it would require a sacrifice. Someone would have to stay behind to complete the binding." The scratching was getting louder. The thing was almost through. I looked at the sacred objects on the altar. My grandmother had taught me enough about the old ways to understand what needed to be done. The binding spell required a willing sacrifice, someone who would give their life force to power the seals. "I'll do it," I said. "Nanking, Enter," the researcher said. "You have a daughter. You have a life to live. I'm the one who caused this. Let me fix it." Before I could argue, the thing burst through the wall behind us. But this time, something was different. Being in the sacred chamber seemed to weaken it. Its glow was dimmer, and it moved more slowly. "You found my prison," it said. "But you cannot repair what has been broken. The seals are destroyed forever." I picked up one of the medicine bags from the altar. It was old, made of leather that had been blessed by shamans long dead. But I could feel the power in it, the same power my grandmother had carried. The seals can be repaired, I said, but it requires a willing sacrifice. The thing laughed. You don't have the knowledge. You're not a shaman. No, I said, but I'm Apache, and I carry the blood of the people who bound you before. I opened the medicine bag and began to recite the words my grandmother had taught me. They were old words, from the time before the white men came, words of binding and protection. The thing hissed and started toward me, but the sacred words seemed to hold it back. It was fighting against the power of the binding, but it was growing weaker. It won't work, it said. You need a shaman to complete the spell. I am a shaman, said a voice from behind me. I turned and saw Lisa standing in the entrance to the chamber. But she was different now. Her skin was pale and translucent, and she glowed with the same light as the sacred objects on the altar. Lisa, I said. I'm not alive anymore, she said. But I'm not gone either. The spirits of this place have given me a chance to finish what we started. She moved to the altar and picked up another medicine bag. When she opened it, the chamber filled with a golden light that made the thing scream and cover its eyes. Together, she said, we can repair the seals, but it will cost us both. I understood. To power the binding spell, we would have to give our life force to the prison. Lisa was already dead, but I would have to join her. I thought about Sarah, about my daughter who needed me. But I also thought about all the people who would die if this thing escaped to the surface. I'm ready, I said. Lisa and I began to recite the binding words together. The golden light grew brighter, and the symbols on the walls began to glow. The thing was screaming now, fighting against the power of the spell. You cannot imprison me again, it roared. I am eternal. So are we, Lisa said. The binding spell reached its climax. The golden light exploded outward, and I felt my life force being drawn into the walls of the chamber. The symbols blazed with power, and the thing's screams grew fainter. But just as the spell was about to be completed, something unexpected happened. The thing made one last desperate attack, lunging straight at me with its claws extended. I didn't have time to dodge. The claws raked across my chest, and I felt my blood spray across the sacred altar. But instead of weakening the spell, my blood seemed to strengthen it. The thing's eyes went wide as it realized what had happened. Apache blood on the sacred altar. It was the final component the binding spell needed. No! It screamed as the walls of the chamber began to close in around it. But it was too late. The prison was repairing itself, and the thing was being pulled back into the stone. The last thing I saw was its glowing eyes, filled with rage and hate, as it disappeared into the rock. Then everything went dark. I woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later. The doctors told me I'd been found unconscious in the cave, suffering from blood loss and exposure. They said it was a miracle I'd survived. The official report said there had been a cave-in in the lower cave. 4 researchers had been killed, and the affected passages had been permanently sealed for safety reasons. Lisa Blackhorse had died in the line of duty, trying to rescue the trapped researchers, hers. But I knew the truth. The thing was imprisoned again, held by the same sacred seals that had contained it for centuries. And Lisa was part of those seals now, her spirit bound to the prison to make sure it never escaped. The Park Service gave me a disability pension for my injuries. It wasn't much, but it was enough to pay for Sarah's treatment. And somehow, miraculously, the treatment started working. The doctors couldn't explain it, but her leukemia went into complete remission. I never went back to work in the caves. Instead, I took a job with the Tribal Council, helping to preserve and protect sacred sites. I told them about the chamber in Carlsbad Caverns, and they agreed to post guards to make sure no one disturbed the seals again. But sometimes, late at night, I can still hear the thing calling to me. It's weak now, trapped behind the barriers we created, but it's still there, and it's still hungry. I've learned to live with the knowledge that there are ancient evils in the world, things that were old when the first humans walked the earth. The Apache shamans knew about them, and they built prisons to keep them contained. But prisons need guardians. And sometimes, the guardians have to make the ultimate sacrifice. I visit the cave every month just to make sure the seals are holding. I can feel Lisa's presence there, watching over the prison. She's not at peace. She can't be. Not while that thing is still alive down there. But she's doing her duty, just like she always did. The cave is quiet now. The tourists come and go, never knowing what lies beneath their feet. The bats have returned, and everything seems normal on the surface. But I know better. I know that some prisons were built by our ancestors for very good reasons. And I know that the price of keeping those prisons locked is eternal vigilance. The thing is still down there, waiting. And someday someone might be foolish enough to break the seals again. When that happens, I'll be ready. Because some responsibilities pass from one generation to the next, and mine is to make sure that the darkness stays where it belongs. In the depths, where it can never again see the light of day.